It is considered useful and enlightening and therapeutic to think about death for a few minutes a day. I don't want anybody seeing my body. I don't want a party. Reported dead. Throw me into a wood chipper and spray me into Harrods, at middle of the rush hour. That would be pretty epic. I wouldn't mind being remembered in that way.
What's up, sobers? Why would anybody want to be famous or be a celebrity? Why would you want that kind of pressure? Why does it seem like there's so many people who are driven for fame, fortune, power, success, status, all of these things that literally complicate your life so dramatically? And once you've finally gotten there, it's a constant struggle to maintain that same level of wealth, status, power, and the only way to do it is to keep grinding and keep giving the industry what it wants, keep feeding the machine. And a lot of the time, that comes at huge detriment to the artist, the actor, actress, the person that is putting themselves in a position where they're not really even taking care of themselves or focusing on how they can better themselves as a human. They're just chasing this superficial status dream. But not everybody who's famous or is a celebrity finds their way to fame because they wanted it that way. Sometimes it just falls into your lap and you're thrust into this entirely new lifestyle. Talk about culture shock. You go from struggling financially to suddenly everybody knows you and you have more money than you can shake a stick at. So it can be overwhelming, especially for someone who wasn't necessarily planning on it or didn't really have any interest in being this public figure. And in today's story, that's exactly the case. He was not really looking for fame. He wasn't chasing this dream of stardom. He didn't want everybody to know who he was. And he certainly wasn't worried about finances, that's for sure. But when the opportunity came knocking, he took it. And sometimes that's all it takes is one swift decision, one moment, one chance, one opportunity to present itself. You could honestly choose to pass it by. Maybe you didn't even notice the opportunity was there. But he jumped on it. And it skyrocketed him to success, stardom, international celebrity status, and it opened the door for a whole new lifestyle. And one of the things that separates him from most celebrities that we see is that he didn't find the success until he was 44 years old. And like he said himself, we live in a strange world nowadays where chefs can actually be revered as celebrities. In the past, that's almost never been a thing. Chefs were in the kitchen to be nor seen nor heard. Compliments to the chef. We're not going to talk to him personally, but send my compliments to the chef. So after 2 failed book attempts, Anthony Bourdain really didn't have any expectation of success. But at the turn of the century, when he released his book Kitchen Confidential, that would all change. And overnight, a little-known chef from New York would become a chef sensation. He would then go on to produce 2 of the most uniquely influential TV shows, perfectly combining not only food, but culture into one amazing experience that's truly eye-opening, especially if you live in a very privileged area. He was able to showcase some of the struggles and just how important food is to some of these different cultures around the world. But Tony himself talks about how, in reflection, he feels like the show was honestly never really about food. Instead, it was more about learning who he was, the human condition, and just seeing for his own eyes just these different cultures, how important food is, and some of the struggles that they have to deal with just to get by on a day-to-day basis. It was truly an eye-opening experience, not just for Anthony, but also every viewer that watched the shows. He was an international icon, and if you don't know his name, then you certainly know his face because he's been literally everywhere. So in 2018, when he suddenly passed away, it led so many people, including myself, to wonder, how could somebody with such a perfect situation think about ending it all? Well,
let's go. Alcohol.
All right. Welcome back to Sobering Stories with me, DJ Putkowski. Business item number 1. I just wanted to start off by saying that I normally get very anxious and nervous to sit down and start filming and go through all this stuff. It's just a thing. I don't know. It's like stage fright kind of. I don't really know what it is. But this week, not so much. I've been super excited to sit down here and talk with you guys because I found some pretty interesting stuff. And if you're not familiar, we've been talking over the last few weeks about the Silent Children Project, the ties between Avicii, Chester Bennington, and Chris Cornell. And the last person who was mentioned in that original post was Anthony Bourdain, which is kind of off the wall, doesn't really mesh with the other 3. The other 3 were musicians. The other three had very significant, obvious ties to promoting and advocating awareness about human trafficking. But Anthony Bourdain doesn't seem to fit into that same mold. It's kind of strange. Why do you get lumped in with everybody else? But the point I'm trying to make is that if you haven't watched the Avicii, Chester, and Chris videos, then I would recommend going back and watching those, because they're the last 3 videos that I've done, and my goal with everything is to really try and figure out how all 4 of these guys tie together. It'll be hard for you to do that with me if you don't watch those other ones. Second business item, and this is going to be our sponsor for the week. Our sponsor this week is actually you. You've been supporting the channel, and because of your support, we've continued to grow, and each and every week, I love seeing the growth, the comments, the love on the channel, just literally everything about what's going on. I'm all for it. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you guys for subscribing to my channel, for hanging out with me each and every week, for sitting for like an hour listening to me yap. I really appreciate it. So thank you guys so much for the support, for the sponsorship, and I look forward to seeing you guys every single Friday from here until, I don't know. Now this week, I went into my research with fairly low expectations. I honestly didn't expect to find very much, but I should have known that I was wrong, because there is just so many strange things going on when it comes to all of these guys and what eventually happened to them. And I think I mentioned this either in my Chris Cornell video or my Chester Bennington video, I can't remember. But I remember when both of those guys were announced over the news, having been passed away, I was super confused. And in my heart of hearts, deep down in my very soul, I just felt like something was off. It just didn't make any sense. And I can very vividly remember when that happened with Anthony Bourdain as well, because I was just thinking, what is this guy who eats food for a living, travels the world, and gets to see the entire world, really, and gets to experience all these amazing cultures, and his shows, you see so much love from the local people. What does this guy have to complain about? Like, really? I remember it just striking me as very odd, and I feel like a lot of other people were probably in the same boat as me, just like, what? Why? Seriously? But to be quite honest with you, I really didn't know these guys even a little bit. Like, I listened to their music, I watched Anthony Bourdain's TV show, but did I truly know anything about who they were, what they struggled with, anything? No, I really didn't. Really, the only thing I knew was what the mainstream media wanted me to know. I didn't know anything. And very similar to my Avicii episode, the official narrative of what happened with Anthony Bourdain, there is really no details about the last final days leading up to what happened. And yet there is publications, news articles, media outlets, all talking about this is exactly what happened. This is what led to this happening. These are the facts. And so everybody accepts them as facts. But how do we know they're facts? Just because they told us they're facts? But let's just start with some of the easy ones. Anthony Michael Bourdain was born on June 25th, 1956. His dad's name was Pierre and his mom's name was Gladys, and the two of them were fairly normal, middle class. He grew up in a pretty normal household. He said that it wasn't abusive in any way. He wasn't subjected to religion in any way. He experienced all the love that he would ever ask for, and he was given anything that he ever asked for, so he said he had a pretty normal childhood. His dad was a classical music recording executive, and his mom was a New York Times editor. So, I mean, they say fairly middle class, but I would imagine that they were making pretty decent money, especially living in the New York, New Jersey area. Tony had a younger brother by a few years named Chris, and they were raised in the Leonia, New Jersey area. Tony was fairly quiet and reserved as a youngster, and his parents actually thought that because he was so reserved that he might have some sort of learning disability or something, but he was actually really smart. He taught himself to read by the time he was in kindergarten, which is super impressive. And not only that, he was very interested in just off-the-wall counterculture things, and he showed a very serious interest in food and cooking at a very young age. There's a story that talks about how he had actually gone on a trip to France with his family, and he was able to try an oyster for the first time. And he said that that experience left a lasting impact on him and kind of drove him towards wanting to pursue food as a career. Not only that, it was kind of a bizarre experience. He got to experience some sort of culture aspect when it comes to food. It's supposedly a delicacy, but it's also kind of a strange thing to be considered a delicacy. And so there was something about it that just opened his eyes to, honestly, what would end up being the future of Anthony Bourdain. Food and culture. After graduating from high school, Tony decided to go off to college at Vassar College, but he only lasted a couple of years. But one thing he did get out of that experience was he was working while he was in college as a dishwasher for a place called the Lobster Pot, and he developed a love for the kitchen. He developed a love for food and just what it's like to be in that industry. After dropping out, he realized he was driven towards a passion in maybe becoming a chef or at least being a cook, and really learning and honing in on his skills to be able to make good food for people. So after dropping out of Vassar College, he decided to go to the Culinary Institute of America, and he graduated from there in 1978. From here, he would go on to run 3 fairly successful kitchens in New York City, 1 Fifth Avenue, Sullivan's, and the Supper Club. And these would be really good stepping stones to where he would actually hit his big break as an executive chef for, pardon my French, Brasserie Les Halles. I think that's how you say it. At that time in 1998, the restaurant actually had multiple locations. It had the Manhattan location, which Tony was the executive chef for. It had a location in Miami, Washington, D.C., and even one in Tokyo. But it was a really well-established restaurant, and it was actually a fairly good gig for him. But that wasn't the only thing that Tony was interested in. Perhaps because his mom was an editor and he was just always interested in learning and reading and writing, he was a very good writer, and he was actually a very passionate writer. He loved writing. In fact, he loved it so much that from the 80s onward, he would continue writing different books, and most of them were like culinary mystery novels, which I think is kind of like a funny fusion, but they were never really that successful. But Tony's writing would turn a new page in 1999 when he would write an article for The New Yorker called Don't Eat Before Reading This. And mostly it just went over behind the scenes looks into different restaurants and kind of the world in the back of the house. And for some people, it might be a little bit graphic and disturbing to know what goes on in the kitchens of their favorite restaurants. But the article was a smash hit, and it was so successful that he was offered $50,000 to get a full book published, and he went for it. The book was called Kitchen Confidential: Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. Say that 5 times fast. And the book was hugely successful. It was considered part personal anecdote, almost like a memoir of his experience coming up as an executive chef. And then it also gives you a behind-the-scenes look into what the restaurant world is really like. And one thing that we really get from this book is Tony's signature no bullshit attitude and just his shooting it straight, kind of a direct way of conveying how things really are. And I think people really love that. Like I mentioned in a previous episode, people love authenticity. So when somebody is that genuine and raw, they can trust that what they're saying is truth. It's fact. They don't have to wonder if this person is just making fluff to make them look better or make something look better or make them feel better. They know that what he's speaking is truth. This book was immediately successful. It was an overnight New York Times bestseller. And Anthony Bourdain, who prior to this was not paying his taxes, didn't have a credit card, wasn't paying his rent, and was really seeming to struggle financially, was now an overnight celebrity.
I'd been in the restaurant business long enough to know that there's nothing more foolish than a person who thinks they can make a living writing, or acting for that matter. I was in a profession where everybody was a writer or an actor, and I'd been in the business for over 25 years at that point. I was in my 40s, so I had a pretty minimal expectations when I started to write this article, intending it for a free paper called the New York Press. Comes out in boxes on the corner. Take all you want, they're free. I figured their standards were low enough that I had a good crack at it and I might make $100, which is exactly what happened. I sent it in. Editor said, yeah, we'll run it, it's great, we'll give you $100. I was thrilled. I'd written this article hoping that people in the restaurant business like me in New York City, some of them anyway, would read it and find it entertaining. It would, sort of goose the non-professionals with, scary revelations about, stuff we all knew, like, your unmolested bread is probably going to go out again. And also just, I don't know, I wanted my fry cook and a few other cooks in New York to read it and say, this is not bogus, I recognize this, and it's funny. They said they'd take it, and then week after week after week, I kept getting bumped. So in a moment of drunken hubris, I called them up and said, screw you, I'm taking the article back. And I sent it to the New Yorker unsolicited. And I forgot all about it because, who sends stuff to the New Yorker unsolicited. Weeks later, I get a call in the kitchen. It's David Remnick, and it says he's going to print the article. And I was like, wow, that's really great. And it was great. 2 days after it came out, it was a news story. I mean, there were reporters chasing me for comment on these horrible revelations, which is like, really? But it changed my life immediately. I was in a pretty, I was 44. I'd given up any dream of ever being out of debt, current with my taxes, insured, current with my rent, current with the credit card companies. If I was sure of anything, it was that I would never see Vietnam, much less Rome. So it was a nice bit of business.
One of the other things he talks about in this book fairly extensively is his struggles with the black tar. He had a serious addiction problem that stemmed from when he was younger, and really he said it just kind of started because he was just looking for a drug to do, which is kind of interesting. I don't know. He didn't really have any way to explain it, but I think it can allude back to the fact that he had this depressed darkness inside of him, and I think he was just looking for some way to self-medicate, and he found it. And unfortunately, he got hooked on it, but he knew he was going to get hooked on it. It was just a part of the culture. It was a part of the scene. But for me, my question is, how is he able to be a chef, a cook, any of those like high intensity jobs while also being addicted to this intense downer? I don't know. That was pretty impressive to me because I don't think I could do it. Tony struggled with his addiction through most of the 80s, but he said he finally made the decision to get off of it. He said he looked in the mirror and he just saw somebody worth saving. And he decided to save that guy.
The option, it was very difficult. It was very dangerous. In my case, it just ground me down to the point that my choices became very stark, either get well or sink.
I looked in a mirror and I saw somebody worth saving, or that I wanted to at least try real hard and save. Anybody could find themselves very easily in this situation. And, I look back on that and I think about what I'll tell my daughter, that was Daddy. Ain't no doubt about it, but I hope that I'll be able to say that was Daddy then, this is Daddy now.
It's very different now. Now, the football team and small town white America are just as likely as, the stereotypical inner city troubled youth. It's everywhere now. I mean, it's a huge, huge, huge problem, but it is directly, in my view, and in many people's view, directly related to the spread of legitimately prescribed, if overprescribed, pharmaceutical drugs.
So after 5 years of being on methadone and just trying to work through the struggles of letting go of this addiction, he was able to sober up. And a lot of people talk about how impressive it is that he was able to just kind of cold turkey, just give it up and, manage his cravings and his sickness, I guess, with methadone. So I thought that was a pretty interesting piece of it. And from this point forward, Anthony would be sober, at least from that. He would continue to drink alcohol, but he didn't take any other drugs. And I think writing was really where he found solace. That's where he was able to express his thoughts, and he was really able to find that same soothing self-medication quality that he was finding through drugs in his writing. And I think that's a really awesome avenue. And I think if there's anybody out there that's struggling with their own personal addiction or struggles, writing could be a good place to start because it can help you analyze your own thoughts, really get your thoughts out on paper, and help you express how you might really be feeling. And then when you read it back, you might actually be kind of shocked to read some of the stuff that you read. But just a little anecdote there, I guess. But I think it's safe to say that once Tony finally kicked his habit, that's when he was really free to open himself up, and he was more motivated to actually chase after his dreams. So that's where we see all this writing coming from. He then gets this position as an executive chef, and things from there just start exploding for him after this book, Kitchen Confidential. So much so that by 2001, he was offered a TV show on Food Network called A Cook's Tour. It was basically a precursor to the shows that we'd see him go on to do later, but essentially just him traveling around the world and allowing the hosts of each country that he visits to treat him to different foods and delicacies that are prevalent in that country. A Cook's Tour was so successful that the Travel Channel wanted a piece of that, and it kind of fit in with what they're doing as well. So they brought Anthony Bourdain on to do another series very, very similar to that one called No Reservations. Tony also featured in another Travel Channel series called The Layover, which is kind of an interesting concept. Essentially, it's about the different things and places you can explore during a 24 to 48 hour layover period if you were stuck at an airport. So kind of specific to those people who are like, damn, we're stuck here for another day or two. Like, what are we going to do? Bam, you got the layover. You can watch an episode and he's going to go check out a bunch of things that are within the local area that are worth checking out. So kind of a cool series. But his time with the Travel Channel would come to an end in 2012. And then CNN would actually pick up Tony to be able to do another very similar series called Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown. I would say the biggest change with this series versus No Reservations was there was more of an emphasis on politics, and a lot of the places that he was going were not necessarily fancy destination style places. Oftentimes he'd find himself in these very impoverished communities, and he would have a lot that he was learning and seeing, and it became a very political show because some of the stuff that you see you can't unsee, and it shows you just truly how privileged we are in America, in the UK, in many parts of the world to have the things that we have, and seeing just how little other countries really do have, and just how much they really truly appreciate a simple meal. So after years of never chasing celebrity status, money, power, any of that stuff, Anthony Bourdain quickly became an overnight sensation. Everybody recognized his face, and honestly, people talk a lot about how he truly taught them something, because short of him going and filming in these different locations and showing us firsthand what life is like there, there's no way for us to know living where we live or where you live or anywhere aside from going there and seeing it for yourself. So I think he shed a light on some different issues that a lot of people may never have thought about in their entire lifetime. But Tony was so popular, they even did a sitcom spin-off kind of a thing called Kitchen Confidential, starring a main character called Jack Bourdain, basically just a sitcom about life as a chef in the kitchen. And so, I mean, that should just show you how popular this guy was. They're writing TV sitcom specials about him and his story. One of the more endearing qualities about Tony was the fact that he just romanticized things. He romanticized food, he romanticized the cultures around the food and different places, and he was also just a hopeless romantic in general. Anthony was married prior to his rise to fame, but that marriage quickly came to an end in 2005, most likely because of the fame. He was now traveling constantly. I mean, the guy traveled like 256 or 265 days a year, something like that. So the time that he had to give to a partner was very limited, and he was kind of married to his work. So it only makes sense that after he got divorced in 2005, that the next woman that he would meet would be while he was on set filming. While filming in Italy, he actually met a young lady named Ottavia Busia. She's a businesswoman and mixed martial artist that lived in Italy, and the two of them just hit it off right away. They had the same sense of humor, kind of a dark, twisted, sarcastic sense of humor, and she just didn't cut him any slack. She didn't idolize him like this big celebrity. She just treated him like anybody else. But the two of them got along so well, they decided that they would get married, and they ended up having a daughter together. And this was a huge turning point for Tony in his life. He didn't ever think that he would be a good dad. He didn't think that he could be a dad. So he never had any real plans or gave any thought to being a father. But once he was in love with his daughter. He was in love with being a dad, and he really was a great dad. But just like before, Tony's line of work, he's literally traveling most of the year. So that eventually kind of threw a wrench in the works and led to them deciding to separate. They didn't officially divorce. In fact, they never officially got divorced, but the two of them wouldn't be living together, and they'd kind of just be co-parenting their daughter. But their daughter obviously lived with Ottavia. And in a very similar fashion, once they decided to separate in 2016 and start seeing other people, Tony actually met another young lady while he was on set in a different place, and he was actually filming in Rome for this episode of Parts Unknown, and he met a young lady named Asia Argento, and she is somebody that you guys might recognize as a pretty famous actress. I think the only movie that I really recognized her from was Triple X, but she's someone who is involved in the industry. She's also famous herself, and she also has her own money and her own life, essentially. So it honestly would be a good fit for Tony because he's kind of on the same waves as she is. They're both huge superstar celebrities, and more than anything, she gets the travel piece of the job. She understands what it's like to have to travel for work and to not fully be available to a partner at any given time. According to most people around Tony at the time, they had a pretty weird relationship. He started letting go of a lot of people that had been on his team helping him film throughout the last decade and replaced them with a couple of new people, that being Asia Argento as the director, and he brought in Chris Doyle as his new filmographer for this like later seasons of Parts Unknown. And though it seemed really weird for the crew at the time and anybody surrounding Tony, they all realized that he was starting to hit this real depression, and he was starting to lose his life, his zest that he normally displayed on camera, and that was becoming very apparent in each episode. So once they finally decided to allow Asia and Chris Doyle in to kind of work with him on the project, it seemed to reinvigorate his zest for the project, and it seemed to reinvigorate him in general. He was in love, and he was stoked to be able to be around Asia, whom was now the director, and they could actually share in some of these experiences. And now he didn't have to worry about someone leaving him because of the distance and his job. He had someone who was working with him. Up till this point, Tony had always said that he would likely never stop working. They would likely find him unresponsive at some point on the set because he just couldn't leave the role. He was truly grateful and thankful and felt super lucky to even have the job that he had. So it almost seemed like he might have predicted his own passing when in 2018 he was found unresponsive in his hotel room in France while they were there on location shooting for Parts Unknown. The night prior to this, Tony didn't show up for dinner with the rest of the crew, which most people said was kind of strange, especially for Tony. He was there for every meal. He was definitely a guy who loved to eat. So for him to not be there at dinner was a little strange, but nobody really reached out at that point. They just figured he might need his own space, his own time to kind of do his own thing. According to the staff at that point in time, he was kind of in a different place, kind of a darker place, but he wasn't necessarily thinking about ending it. But they figured they'd give him a little bit of space, let him skip dinner, hang out in his room by himself. But things got extra weird when he didn't show up for breakfast the next morning. So he was actually out in France, and while they were filming, he was going to be filming with his good friend Eric Reipert. You can see the two of them interact on a lot of different episodes over the course of his different shows. And the two of them seem like really, really close friends. Like the only time you really see Bourdain interacting with someone that you could see as being like a peer or a friend. Unfortunately, Eric goes to check in on him the next morning, and when Eric walks in, he finds him in the bathroom, on the bathroom floor, unresponsive. Word of Tony's passing spread like wildfire, and it left so many people like myself wondering, why? Why would he do this? This guy lived the most amazing life ever. Why? Why? And honestly, you guys, from here, things get real murky yet again. To start things off, very similar to Chris Cornell, Tony was found on the floor by his friend Eric. However, the official manner of exit was using a belt from one of the bathrobes in the hotel bathroom to hang from. So just like Chris Cornell, if he supposedly, was hanging, then why was he found on the floor? That already just doesn't make sense to me. Already, the circumstances surrounding his passing are just strange, but they're eerily similar to Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell. None of these people left a note. They all had families. They all had people that were relying on them, that they cared about, that cared about them. And they all just put their middle finger in the air and said, I'm out. And that is hard to believe, in my opinion, especially being a parent myself. I would have a real hard time not even being able to see my kid again before I go. Like that doesn't make any sense. But not only that, there's another person we haven't even talked about yet who passed away 3 days prior under the exact same circumstances. And her name's Kate Spade. Some of the ladies out there might even have a nice Kate Spade bag at home. To convolute things even further, there's a young Ukrainian lady named Oksana Shayko. Pretty sure I said that wrong. But anyways, she is the co-founder of a feminist activist group called Femin, and they're actually located in France. And she was found hanging as well in July of 2018. Just 1 month after Anthony Bourdain, in the same country. It's very strange, but if you knew the things that she was tied up in, she was hugely outspoken about human exploitation, women's rights, and she was very outspoken about it. She would do nude protests, and honestly, it just seems like she was a huge activist in terms of fighting human and women exploitation around the world. All of these people are involved in very similar subject matter in terms of what they're speaking out on, and then they all turn up the way they did. I think that's why we have so many people theorizing that there's something going on that we are not being told. So I wanted to look into what we actually are being told, because that gives us a whole lot of insights as to what they want us to believe, why they might want us to feel that way, and where are they getting this stuff from, Immediately following Tony's passing, tons of people were trying to find answers. They couldn't understand why somebody in his position would want to self-exit like that. And I think that that's the case for most people. Nobody really understood what he had to be so depressed about. But just because you're living a dream life in some people's eyes doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually a dream life. So we can't really know exactly how Bourdain was feeling, exactly how he was mentally, or where he was at in his journey, just generally. So it's hard to speculate on where somebody was or why they did something. And so it just leaves everybody to wonder, especially since he didn't leave a note. But we did get some answers in 2022 when an unauthorized biography was released. The biography was called Down and Out in Paradise, and it was written by a guy named Charles Leerhsen. This biography is one of a few different ones that have been made about Anthony Bourdain. But what's special about this one is that it claims to have leaked text messages from Tony to Asia Argento that are supposed to give us some sort of idea or some sort of understanding as to why he decided to do what he did. Essentially, what the text messages say is that they got into this huge fight because a picture got posted online of Asia with some French reporter, and they were hugging. They seemed like they were getting a little too close for comfort. And at this point, the biography says that they were in an open relationship, but for some reason, because he was a younger guy and he felt extra threatened by this, Tony was super angry and upset and felt like she had completely mistreated his heart and was super depressed over this. And for someone who already had depressive tendencies and was kind of just needing a reason to be pushed over the edge, it said that these text messages are what pushed him over the edge. So essentially a guy who had one of the roughest personalities, working in one of the roughest industries that you can possibly work in, being food service, being a chef in a fancy restaurant, and then going on to be a celebrity where he travels the world, grueling, grinding, 250 days a year, constantly traveling. This guy endured so much. And yet this book wants to make it seem like these text messages were the final straw, the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. And I guess initially I was like, okay, sure. Like, yeah, where did he get these text messages from though? And then I was like, no, wait, really? Where did he get these text messages from though? Especially under these circumstances. I'm sure that all of Tony's stuff was collected, if they actually did collect the phone, because as we've seen in my previous episodes, the phone always ends up missing or misplaced somehow. So they collected his phone and his laptop. But if they did, that's going to get sent back to the family after the investigation's over. They're not just going to turn this over to some reporter guy who writes documentaries or writes biographies. But I was like really hung up on this detail. From there, I decided to look more into how did he get these text messages then? He says himself that he had 80 plus sources that he's going to keep confidential, of course. Why provide proof or credibility when you don't have to? So he says he's not going to release his sources, but he did get text messages sent to him from a family member or someone close to Anthony is what he says. And so that leads me to believe, okay, somebody leaked these files to him. But then I found another official report, including one from the publisher, saying he was actually given the laptop and phone of Anthony Bourdain. Now, first of all, at least they found the phone and laptop, unlike the previous cases we've talked about. But second of all, think about this. Once the police are done with their investigation, those items are going back to family members, 100%. Probably Ottavia, or maybe his daughter. I don't know who's going to have those things. Asia was just a girlfriend, so they're not going to send her anything. So it's probably going to his second wife. If somebody hit me up and said, hey, I know that your partner has passed away, but I'm doing a biography on them and I'd really like to get their phone and laptop to see what was going on in their final days, just so I could really complete the story and just spread the truth. Would you send them either one of those things? Also, would you believe that they were really going to shed light on the topic the way that you would want them to? That's not happening. I would never release my phone or laptop or my partner's phone or laptop or even my coworker, for God's sake. If I had a coworker that passed and I for some reason had their stuff, I wouldn't even release that stuff to them. So who in their right mind thinks that this guy actually got the laptop and phone and actually has text messages of what Anthony was talking about and doing in his final days? So I didn't like that. I was like, who is this guy? And why is he lying about stuff? And why won't he reveal any of his sources if that will give him immediate credibility? Seems a little shady. The only other time I felt like this was when I was talking about my Kim Porter episode and those Kim Porter memoirs were released. The difference is this book became the mainstream narrative, whereas the Kim Porter memoirs was banned from Amazon and heavily criticized. However, both of them are almost identical in what they present to the public. But I had to dig a little further into this Charles Leerhsen guy, and I had to figure out who is this dude? And turns out he's done a bunch of different biographies in the past. Most notably, he's done some on like Butch Cassidy and some other like Western gunslinger type people. But he hasn't really done anything else like on major celebrities like that, so I thought it was kind of strange. But the one book that I did find interesting was that he co-authored Trump's second book, Surviving at the Top. And I thought that that was very interesting that he had political ties and he was able to co-author a book with someone like Donald Trump. So I was looking into him a little bit further and come across his Facebook, and I find out that this guy actually does not like Donald Trump at all. And he actually regrets even writing that book with him. He's very much in opposition to Trump and the Republicans. And I think that what happened was he wrote that book or co-authored that book with Trump prior to him running for president. And then once he became a Republican nominee / Republican president, his views very quickly shifted. But it doesn't stop there. Not only is he a Democrat, he is a very serious proponent of the Clintons. And in my opinion, if he had ties to Donald Trump, what makes you believe that he doesn't have ties to the Clinton family as well? I don't know what to say. Like I mentioned before, the Kim Porter memoirs were completely removed from Amazon. And that's because of all the backlash that the author and the publisher got from people like Al B. Schur and Kim Porter's family. But when Anthony Bourdain's family, including his second wife, Ottavia, Asia, his most recent girlfriend, Chris, his brother, and Eric, the guy that found him in France, all of them are vehemently opposed to this book being based on anything factual. They're even confused as to how he even got any of that information because they were with him leading up until his final days. And somehow this guy has all this information that even they don't know about. But did they remove the book? No, they didn't. In fact, the publisher stood by the book in a very powerful statement saying, "We stand by the book." So what's different about this one versus the Kim Porter memoirs when they're both seemingly spreading not necessarily factual information? It's not able to be fact-checked by anybody because this guy won't release his sources. So it made me wonder, who's this publisher that won't pull the book? Well, the publisher that we're talking about is Simon & Schuster, and they are no stranger to scandal. In fact, they even got into a scandal where they were accused of trying to orchestrate some sort of market push with 4 other companies to lower the prices of Amazon's ebooks so that they could gain more market share. But one of the most interesting things about Simon & Schuster that I found was not only did they publish Trump's book that he wrote with Charles Leerhsen, but they have also published multiple books for both Hillary and Bill Clinton. Multiple books. And one of the things I read online is that they've actually been accused of these book deals that they've made with the Clintons as being legitimized ways of giving them Democratic Party donations, kind of like money laundering, essentially. They're essentially giving these donations through offering them a book deal, which they know is going to make millions of dollars in sales. And over the course of, I think it was like 6 different books, they net profited $6 million and were able to donate any amount of money that they gave to the Clintons for starting and writing the books up front as essentially a donation to their campaigns. So it's not proven, but a lot of people speculate that that's what they were actually doing by allowing them to publish so many books. In fact, some of them were just like fictional books. A lot of them were just co-authored. It just didn't seem like there was any real reason to have so many books published by the Clintons for no real apparent reason. Couple that with all of these crazy posts in support of Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party, it just made me feel like there was some sort of motivation for this publishing company to get somebody on writing a book about Anthony Bourdain and his final text messages that supposedly are 100% factual to start swaying public opinion as to why he ended up taking his life. And my opinion on that is because people weren't accepting it up until that point. Up until they had some definitive answer as to what happened and why, they were just speculating, and there was a lot of backlash being pushed at the Clintons, especially because of the things that Anthony Bourdain was talking about and doing leading up in the few years before he passed away. Now, in 2017, a lot of you guys might remember the Me Too movement and just kind of a lot of the stuff that was happening around the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal. Asia was actually one of the victims of Harvey Weinstein. And in 2017, she decided to break her silence and speak out with the Me Too movement against Harvey. And Anthony Bourdain, who was essentially dating Asia at the time, was a supportive boyfriend and did everything he could to speak out with her, stand up with her, help be strong with her. And you can see this in tons of posts. He's always talking about how strong she is for coming out and actually doing what she did. He goes even further to completely trash talk Harvey Weinstein online And then he goes another step further and he starts trashing Hillary Clinton for some reason. He's got tons of different tweets where he is talking about how corrupt Hillary is. He's talking about how Hillary is not a dumb person, so there's no possible way that she could hear all the rumors and all the things circulating about Harvey Weinstein and not be informed about what was going on, because Harvey Weinstein was a major donor to the Clinton Foundation. He was a huge donor. And in fact, when the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal happened, they said that the Clinton Foundation needed to give Weinstein's money back to him and get rid of it because it's dirty money, but they didn't. And then there's this one on June 5th, which is 3 days prior to Anthony being no longer with us. He says, I have information that would put Hillary Clinton behind bars. Whoa, that's a big deal. That's explosive. And if you guys are under the impression like I am that the Clintons might have a dangerous side to them, that's pretty provocative. And this all comes after Asia actually explodes at the Cannes Music Festival, and she basically calls out Harvey Weinstein and vocalizes exactly what happened to her. And she goes another step further and she calls out people in the audience, saying that there's people in the audience even, and you know who you are, and we know who you are, that are going to have to own up to their mistakes very soon. It's almost like a threat. And if you're in that audience and you're a member of this circle, that has to be pretty provocative and pretty threatening. What I've heard people talk online about in relation to all of this, because it really kind of confused me, like who cares? You know, what does it have to do with these people speaking up about the Clintons and Weinstein and all this? Well, the significance is this. If this big network was at risk of being exposed because of Harvey Weinstein now going down, the last thing they want is for anybody else to be implicated. They want him to be the end-all, be-all to this situation. He's just a sick, disgusting guy, and it was just him alone. Nobody else is involved in exploiting females in the workplace or any sort of exploitation, really. If it goes further than that, then it risks exposing other people higher up, people also in cahoots with Weinstein, people who definitely have something to do with this. So if Asia is so vocal and open at this Cannes Music Festival, which is a huge event, and then on top of that, Bourdain goes ham and is constantly tweeting about different things that he thinks are happening and is trying to raise awareness about what's going on behind closed doors, then yes, these people need to be silenced because they're risking us being exposed and not just allowing Harvey Weinstein to be the one to take the fall, which seems to be what happened with Epstein. Because I want to remind you guys, on top of all of these people that were found hanging, Epstein was also found hanging. And honestly, it makes me wonder what's going to happen with Diddy. But much like yourselves, I was wondering, why did Bourdain start calling out the Clintons? What tipped him off that he had all this information that could put Hillary in jail? So I started digging further, and he actually made this other tweet where he says, let's assume for purposes of discussion that HRC is Satan's consort and eats children and puppies whenever possible. In what way is Mikey Cohen, the president's fixer, not a problem? And I was like, who's Mikey Cohen? And what's a fixer? So a president's fixer is somebody who usually will arrange for things to be figured out, usually through lawyers or through paying them off or something like that. Basically just there to handle put their fires out. And I was like, who's Mikey Cohen? Well, Mikey Cohen was actually a Jewish American gangster that was kind of the head leader of the Cohen crime family. So, I mean, seems kind of interesting, but he passed away in 1976. But as I was doing some more digging, I not only realized that he was in a movie that he was portrayed by Sean Penn, but also I was looking into who is Hillary's fixer? Who is this Mikey Cohen reference that he's talking about? Who is this guy that he's referring to that is supposedly some sort of crime mob boss and is Hillary's fixer? And when you look up who's Hillary Clinton's fixer, John Podesta is Hillary's fixer. So he's basically saying in this tweet, how are we safe saying that John Podesta is not a problem? And if we know anything about John Podesta, then we know that this is going to bring us right back to Haiti, where we seem to keep ending up in the last three stories that I've talked about. For those of you who are not familiar with John Podesta, not only is he accused of being Chester Bennington's real dad, but it's the John Podesta emails that got leaked during the Hillary Clinton campaign. In these emails, there is a very little known Haiti Development Fund that was started by the Clinton Foundation. They donated $20 million to this project in order to help with the humanitarian efforts down in Haiti. After looking into this fund and seeing what they're actually doing down in Haiti, they were only able to find one project that had anything to do with Haiti, and that left people to wonder, where is all this money going? And what are you actually using it for? In 2016, Anthony Bourdain with the show No Reservations actually went down to Haiti after all the earthquakes happened, and he was just kind of doing his normal thing. But he asked a lot of really important questions when he was down there. One of the things he talked about with a lot of the locals was there's tons of cameras coming down here, tons of Americans and people coming down here offering help, putting cameras in your faces, but you guys don't ever see any change. Week in and week out, this place still looks like a war zone, essentially, because of the earthquakes. They're not receiving any help. People are still living on the streets. People are still hungry. And yet there's supposedly all this money being poured into Haiti to help with all these humanitarian efforts. Where is the progress? So Bourdain is shining a light on this, and he's asking, are we a part of the problem, even just being here filming you guys? While he was down in Haiti, he was actually being hosted by Sean Penn, and Sean Penn actually co-founded this Haitian relief organization with a lady named Diana Jenkins, and they started the Jenkins Penn Haitian Relief Organization. Now, there has been rumors and theories circulating for over a decade now that implicate Diana Jenkins as being a madam, or like a lady pimp. And the reason people believe this is because she wrote a book called Room 23, and this book is supposed to be like a coffee table book, which features all of these different celebrities or political mainstream figures. And this book is said to be just a catalog of all these different celebrities and little facts about them. And it's just supposed to be like an interesting book to be like, oh yeah, cool, there's some interesting facts about all these people. But the book itself has most of these people pictured half naked or in these provocative positions. The book is said to be a catalog for people who are looking to exploit these individuals. It's like a menu almost. So that's kind of what the theory is with Diana Jenkins, but there's a whole lot more that goes into it than that. And honestly, she's kind of an episode all on her own. So not only do we have Laura Silsby down in Haiti and the Clinton Foundation down in Haiti, but now we've also got this Penn Jenkins Foundation down in Haiti as well. All of these things are tied somehow to human trafficking. And with Bourdain down there asking the hard questions and getting the real scoop from the locals, we can only imagine that he probably learned something about the Clintons and their foundation and what they're doing with all this missing money when he was in Haiti. So going back to all these tweets that Bourdain posted, it seems to me like Bourdain posed a legitimate threat to someone. And the missing piece for me is kind of like, how did they get to him? How are they going to know where he's at to be able to figure out what plan to enact to be able to take him out? So what do they typically do with celebrities? Well, they use handlers. And one thing that I noticed with Anthony Bourdain's story, especially watching that Roadrunner documentary, was just how vastly different of a person he was around Asia. He was a completely different person. He was much happier. He was love-struck. He was completely romanticizing everything, and he was kind of back to his happy old self. And it kind of led me to believe that maybe Asia was a handler. I mean, she's already an actress. She's a mainstream actress, but there's a very high likelihood that maybe she was placed specifically in his orbit, which happened in 2016, by the way, when Anthony went to Rome for one of his episodes. But that would be shortly after he went to Haiti and experienced all this other stuff. So the fact that she was kind of placed in his network, that gives them an in to be able to orchestrate their plan a little better. Whether that's true or not, I'm not 100% sure. But I will say that there's a lot of weird things about Asia that lead people to speculate about this. Number one, the fact that she grew up under a very strange satanic occult style upbringing, because her dad is a pretty successful horror movie producer and he had her acting in a lot of his movies. She grew up with a lot of these dark themes. She was abused on screen, even in one of the movies. She has this past, and she's seen in a lot of photos and a lot of her Instagram posts from when she was younger, growing up with a lot of this occult stuff on, very, very dark themes about her, which would lend to the whole occult theme that we've got going on with this whole cabal situation. But it doesn't stop there. Not only was Asia a huge part of the Me Too movement towards Harvey Weinstein, she got herself involved in her very own scandal. Because just before all of that happened with Harvey Weinstein, she was actually caught with a young man who was 17 years old when she was 37 years old. And there's this picture of them. They're mostly not clothed, and they definitely look like they're doing things together. And the interesting thing about this guy, his name's Jimmy Bennett. Jimmy Bennett was an actor in one of Asia's earlier movies where she played his mom in the movie. This kid was like 7 when she met him. And then when he's 17, she's now hopping in bed with him. And this all happens before she comes out and is exposing Harvey Weinstein for what he did.
I was not the person who leaked them to TMZ. I just wanted them to be a part of the legal process going forward. When it became apparent that they were not going to allow for justice to occur or for truth to be on the table, I knew I had no choice but to go forward, because otherwise I would be complicit and I would be robbing another individual of their ability to be heard in their story. I'm not anti-Asia or anti-anything. I believe that Jimmy Bennett deserves to have justice, and I believe that due process deserves to happen. Asia had mentioned that one of the things that is difficult in their life right now is that, with Anthony passing, there was a huge gap, and that this individual had helped them out through a lot of things in life. And one of the things that helped them out with it was an extortion case in which an individual was extorting Asia for $10,000 a month. Hopefully healing can occur, rehabilitation, and they can go back to being an advocate for so many people. And I really hope that that's the case for Asia, because they were a very powerful advocate at one point in this movement.
And it's not until May of 2018 that these allegations actually come out to the public, because Jimmy Bennett, for some reason, decides he sees her being outspoken about this Me Too movement, but he realizes that he was a victim of her, so he's not going to let her get away with it. So he comes out, he's very outspoken about what happened to him and about his age, about everything. And very quickly, Anthony Bourdain pays for this $380,000 settlement to Jimmy Bennett to kind of just keep him quiet and keep things from going any further. But tell me that's not a little bit weird and kind of interesting. And it almost makes me wonder if maybe she got caught doing that, and in order to keep her secret, they said, you need to do us a favor, and planted her with Bourdain. That's all me speculation, but I don't know. Very interesting and kind of weird. And just because she victimized somebody else doesn't mean that she can't be a victim herself. That's not what I'm saying. But it is very weird. Someone who victimized someone like that would then turn around and be so outspoken about being a victim of somebody else. I'm not really sure, but it is peculiar. And then the last piece with Asia that I really found extremely interesting, very cryptic, and I don't know, left more questions as always than answers. But she posted some really interesting posts literally 2 hours before Anthony Bourdain was discovered as being no longer with us. She posted this picture of a t-shirt that is completely ripped at the neck, and on the shirt it says "fuck everyone," and then it says "you know who you are," which is something that she actually wrote on there. And when she exposed Harvey Weinstein at that Cannes Music Festival, she said the same thing. She said, "You know who you are, and we know who you are." 2 hours later, Anthony Bourdain's news breaks, and she actually removes that post. Who was she talking to, and what did she mean with this post? Was she calling out the people who were responsible for taking him from us? Was she calling out the people that maybe she wasn't able to go through with her part of the job and take out Bourdain herself, so they hired somebody else to do it? And she's basically saying, F you guys, like, I didn't want to do it, I thought it wouldn't happen, and now you guys do it anyways. I don't know. This is such a cryptic post, and the fact that she deleted it right after was even weirder. The other interesting post she makes is actually not until 2022, and it's after the release of this unauthorized biography released by Charles Leerhsen. In this book, the final text messages exchanged between Asia and Anthony Bourdain is he says, "Is there anything I can do to make things better or to change your mind?" And she says, "Stop busting my balls," to which he responds, "Okay," and then proceeds to be found unresponsive the next morning. And I think to showcase her opposition and her feelings about this book and how against it she is, she makes a post with her wearing a t-shirt of, weightlifter Ronnie Coleman. And on this post, it says, "Stop busting my balls." And I think she is just kind of sarcastically throwing shade at Charles Leerhsen and this whole unauthorized biography, because it's presenting as fact, and it's presenting as these are all truths. And it's being spread now as the mainstream narrative of, oh, well, Anthony Bourdain was depressed, he used to be a junkie, and now he's heartbroken, and he left this world because he was so heartbroken he couldn't take it anymore.
They said I murdered him. People say I killed him.
Asia Argento is reacting to the hateful comments and social media trolling she endured after the death of her partner, Anthony Bourdain.
I understand that the world needs to find a reason. I would like to find that reason too. He was so deeply loved.
There were allegations that you had not been faithful to Anthony, and of course people jumped on this.
People need to think that he killed himself for something like this. He had cheated on me too. It wasn't a problem with us. He was a man who traveled 265 days a year. When we saw each other, we took really great pleasure in each other's presence, but we are not children. I cannot think of Anthony as somebody who would do an extreme gesture like this for something like that. I had so much pain inside of him, and I didn't see it. I did not see it. And for that, I will feel guilty for the rest of my life.
Whether that's true or not, I'm not the one that can say that, but I didn't believe it. And then now that I've got all these other people who were really close with Anthony Bourdain at the time he was in France, they were there as well, and they're all disagreeing with this biography. Why would I believe it? And now I know there was ulterior motives for pushing this narrative. That gets the heat off the Clintons, and it gives people who are wondering why a reason why, and people aren't going to ask any more questions, except for me and you guys. So I don't know, you guys. To be honest with you, I went into this story, this case, thinking it was going to be real boring, kind of open and shut, not really being able to find any links between everything else. And though I couldn't find any links between Bourdain and the silent children, I think just the fact that he was speaking out against the same people that are said to be responsible for the other three is probably why he got lumped in with everybody else. But I really don't know. This could all be speculation, but I think I found some pretty interesting stuff, and it raises a lot of questions, if nothing else. But I want to know what you guys think. I want to know what you guys know, and if you guys have any information, definitely hit me up. But I really appreciate you guys sitting and hanging out with me this long. I know it's always a long one. If you really can't get enough of my voice and the sobering stories, then I'll put the whole sobering stories playlist right here. If you haven't watched the other videos that I was talking about Chester, Chris, and Avicii, I'll put a playlist that has all of them called Hung right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this one right here as just YouTube trying to tell you what to do with your life. So if that's your speed, go with that one. But I swear, if you have not subscribed to my channel and you're still sitting here watching this, what is going on, dude? Hit that subscribe button and let's solve this problem. I'm stoked that you guys continue to come back and appreciate the channel. And thank you guys so much again for being my sponsor for the week. But that's all I got for you guys this week. So join me again next Friday for another one. And until then, stay safe, stay sober. Later, sobers. Fuck yes. Fuck yeah.
Let's go.